My name is Cecil. I am the founder and CEO of Revolution Software, and I'm here primarily to talk about Broken Sword 5, which comes out on Switch on the 21st of September. When we first wrote the very first Broken Sword, we worked with Virgin as our publisher, and that was great, but we knew nothing about who our audience was, because the retailers had the direct relationship with their audience, and then the publishers with the retailers, us with the publishers. And so we were delighted that the press liked it, and clearly it sold well, but we had no idea who our audience actually was. And then through Broken Swords 2 and then eventually Broken Sword 3, Broken Sword 3, the model was utterly broken. The publishing model, still going through retail. Our publisher, THQ, made a profit of about $5 million. We actually made a loss of £200,000. And that was kind of the way it worked, and it was very difficult to see how it could change. But digital distribution changed everything. We got a call from Apple one day, and they said, "We've just released the iPhone. We think that your game would work really well on our platform." And that was the turning point. That was the point where we went from, we're effectively insolvent, we write games that are successful, but we're losing money, which is a really bad business model. What the hell are we going to do? And we built ourselves up, and part of it was the support, the wonderful support of Apple. They allowed us, we basically republished Beneath the Steel Sky, then Broken Sword. They featured us, and we had 2.5 million downloads in one day, which was just unbelievable. And from that, we kind of were able to move forward and generate the funds to start Broken Sword 5. We could only ever do it for about 6 months or so, but then we did a Kickstarter, and that was really where the journey started, because we had the opportunity to rebuild our relationship with our community, and discover who they were, and discover that they were very passionate, and they all had stories they wanted to share, and we loved hearing them, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was great, and so that was when we first started Broken Sword 5. The Switch is an ideal platform for several reasons. The first one is that, well, from a commercial perspective, Nintendo are brilliant at selling to a beachhead of their Nintendo fans and then broadening the audience, which is exactly what they've done. And we kind of felt that we ought to wait until there was that broad audience, because they are ideal for an adventure audience. But also, the reason, of course, it's called Switch is because it's the idea of switching between a portable and then being able to play it, docking it. And seamlessly we've transitioned between the two, which I'm really pleased with, because it basically gives people a choice. It's always a little bit, you have to be a little bit careful when you decide two different interfaces. But the Switch was all about switching. It was all about offering both options. So I thought it was important that we did that. And I'm really pleased that we can transition seamlessly between the two. But specifically for Switch players, we've also got bonus films. And those bonus films are behind the scenes, never seen before, that unlock as you play through the game, and they will relate to bits. So it might be how we decided to address the layout, or it might be elements about the gameplay, or it might be about the history. But I think people will find it really interesting, and as I say, this was the opportunity to put in something that was special and it was unique for the Switch version. Let me answer this in two ways. The first one was that when we approached Ubisoft to produce Broken Sword on the DS, because our fans really lobbied for it. And Ubisoft, bless them, said, well, actually what you should do is the director's cut, because we want to publish something that feels different. So that gave us the opportunity on DS to create, because there weren't any there were from the Japanese publishers, but it wasn't quite what we wanted to do. So we were able to spend the time actually creating a touch interface that worked best for Broken Sword, which is when we were then approached by Apple. We already had a lot of experience, and we were able to adapt it. So we owe Nintendo a great debt of gratitude. The problem is that the original Broken Sword games were at 640x480, so relatively low resolution, high resolution at the time, of course. And we didn't keep the original assets, because why on God's earth would you ever need all those original Photoshop files? We couldn't imagine ever needing them, because we were working with publishers, and publishers were going to never republish it. So of course, when these opportunities came, we didn't have a lot of the assets. So we were able to recreate them, up-res them in certain cases, but we would need to do an awful lot of work to create a higher res, particularly a 1080 version, to the quality of Broken Sword 5. And it's something that we'd love to do, but it's not something that we're considering at this particular moment. What we don't want to do is take our community for granted. They've been fantastically supportive, and the last Kickstarter was 5 years ago. So it's not like we're milking it, but people sometimes say, "Oh, we'd like to do this, so we'll kickstart it," and it's like, yeah, but you'll be using our community, and what we don't want to do is, one, give them a bad Kickstarter, or two, keep going back to them and asking them to support projects. So absolutely, I really, really enjoyed the relationship that we built, the whole experience, and we will do it again, absolutely. But it's something that I think, out of respect for them, we should do infrequently rather than frequently. Well, I've said that I'm working on the story. We are working on a new game at the moment, a new adventure game, which is super ambitious, and I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about it next year.
So you can't say anything now?
Sorry.
It's like Broken Sword, or is it something completely different for Revolution?
It's going to be something different, but it's very much an adventure. Very much so. Now, In Cold Blood, our problem with In Cold Blood is exactly the same thing. We rendered it, and we don't have the original files. So we would effectively, to bring the original In Cold Blood, which so many people remember really, really warmly, our interface wasn't great. If I'm honest, the interface wasn't great. But the story and the way it was told and the way that it integrated with the world, people seem to really resonate. Whenever I come to these shows, people say, when are you going to do another In Cold Blood? Which is incredibly flattering, because the game at the time wasn't enormously successful. But it did reasonably well, and it's just great that people remember it. That's the thing about adventure games. People remember adventure games. They won't remember the last shooter. They'll buy the last shooter, but then they'll buy the next one and the next one and the next one. Adventure games people remember, which is incredibly flattering. So clearly telling stories doesn't have to be, in games, doesn't have to be a storyteller comes up with a beginning, a middle and an end, because Fortnite is all about stories. It's all about the stories of surviving. It's all about how you did. It's about beating your mates, beating people that you've never met before, all of these things. But an adventure game, of course, what it does do is it is all about crafting a story. And one of the things that I was very interested in was how films craft their stories. And there were fascinating parallels. So, between Beneath the Steel Sky and Broken Sword, I was putting quite a lot of effort into understanding how films write linear. And I think that paid quite good dividends, because there are so many similarities between the two. So for example, in Broken Sword, it was, it's quite clear that you need a second character, because when you convey the exposition, you want to do it through dialogue. And because of, what I'd learned, because I thought, well, I love Paris, so, let's have a sassy French Parisian girl. But then, to juxtapose, what is the opposite? What is somebody that she will then find has, they have an interesting relationship between the two, that there's sexual tension, that culturally they're different. And that's why, I came up with an American, and the two are very interesting in the way that they interface with each other, I would think, I hope. And I think that's one of the reasons that Broken Sword is popular, because the characters do work well together. They have a different take on life, and it's those differences that create the humour and the drama and allow us to drive the story through. Now, a lot of people are jumping on a bandwagon. I thought when we founded Revolution that women were being portrayed, they were being portrayed in a disgusting, derogatory, misogynistic way. These days I played as a BAFTA judge, and there were more female protagonists than male protagonists. So, the war has been won, the battle has been won. But, back in those days, it just felt right. It felt better storytelling-wise. It wasn't based on political correctness. It was just a better way to tell a story, to have a good, strong female protagonist and a good, strong male protagonist. And actually, the relationship was built on one of equality. It wasn't, sexualizing women. So, don't get me started. But we were doing it because it was the right thing, rather than because it would gain us some sort of credibility in a modern environment. When we write games, Broken Sword 6 now is both on PC and console and mobile. And as an independent developer, when we wrote Broken Sword 4, it came out on PC alone, and that was because THQ decided that it was only going to come out on PC. Now we have the freedom to produce it across multiple platforms and in English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Polish, Russian, Japanese, 2 Chinese, 10 languages. We have the opportunity now, because we can and because it makes sense, to exploit it all over the world. And that's great. I mean, in many ways it's terrifying because the world is, less than 20% of our sales are in the UK, which is great. But it also means for a Polish or a German or an Australian or a whatever Russian developer, they could just easily translate into English and come in and publish in England. So what we have is this extraordinary freedom, this market that is truly global. And that does offer great challenges because it's so competitive. But my God, great opportunities when you get it right. So at the moment we're getting it right, and that's fantastic. Long may it last. So I took a lot of inspiration from Tintin when I was writing it, because what I loved about Tintin was you had characters that returned, and it didn't matter the order in which you read the books. They still made sense, and they were still fun, and you got to love the characters. So I very much designed Broken Sword in that way. You can play them in any order, and you will recognize some of the characters, and it doesn't matter if they come out of order. And then, perhaps if you do play them out of order, you'll get the joy of actually being able to play and discover when the first character emerged on the scene. So yeah, no, it's very, very much based on the fact that, very much designed around the idea that you can play them in any order, and you lose nothing by playing the 5th one. And if you do play the 5th one, hopefully you'll then go back and play the earlier ones, I hope. One of the lovely things about the games industry is that developers really cooperate with each other. Because unlike film and television where they hate each other, we realize that our competition is not each other. If somebody buys an adventure game and they get into adventures, then they're much more likely to buy ours. And we don't look at it that way. We really get on extremely well. But it's underpinned by the fact that we're not really competitors with each other. We're actually collaborators trying to grow the market together. And so, I love the fact that Telltale is so successful. I love, Life is Strange is great. A game like Her Story clearly is an adventure. The whole genre is diversifying, and it's appealing to a wider audience. I really do think it's a terrific genre to be writing games in at the moment. It has huge potential.